Morning. Yes, it is. Good morning, Mr. Smith.
Good morning.
I didn't realize I didn't have my video on. I thought, okay. Video issues. Pretty sun outside today.
It's a beautiful day. At least it's a sunny day.
It's better than yesterday. Yesterday was so dreary.
So 3 feet of snow expected in Philadelphia.
It's going to be a doozy. I'm thinking, like, should we be planning for, maybe this is a Jeff question, for our meeting Thursday to just be virtual?
Yes.
Because it doesn't make sense to have to prepare that space and then we end up not needing to use it. So I'd like to connect with Jeff later on today. It sounds as if there's going to be a lot of pushback.
That took him a long time to respond.
What's that?
I said he was slow to respond on that one.
Oh.
So I sent my daughter snow gear to be delivered so she can wipe the snow off of her brand new car that she just bought, because I'm pretty sure she forgot to buy the scraper and the brush.
Yeah.
Love it. Always a mom.
Same day delivery. Love Amazon.
So it never ends. Is this what I have to look forward to?
Oh, it's a lifelong commitment.
It never ends, right? It never ends.
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Glad to be here.
Can
Good
people
morning.
please mute if you're not speaking?
Ms. Kizgamara is here. Mr. Frisch?
Hello.
Hi, Mr. Frisch. Let's see, Ms. McLaughlin? I don't know if she's here. I see her on here. Megan, Ms. McLaughlin, are you here?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Good morning. Okay, Dr. Anderson is here. Ms. Cohen, are you with us yet?
Finally in, thanks.
You made it in. Thank you. Ms. Marin?
Good
I
morning.
heard you. Good morning. Ms. Sizemore Heiser?
I'm here.
Excellent. All right, I think we are all here.
Darren at Fairfax.
I apologize. I was looking straight at your picture. All right, we are ready to go. Mr. Plattenberg, take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Pugarski and Ms. Karen Kizgamara. We're really fortunate today to have members of the Fairfax County Planning Office that are with us today. Today's meeting, we're going through really as a part of our Goal 4 resource stewardship and the CIP process. This is one of the meetings where we talk about changes in land use and development that may affect our facilities through our entire development review process. So as I said, we're very fortunate to have members of the zoning staff here, and that is from the actual zoning division is Ms. Tracy Strunk. She's the director of the zoning evaluation division for Fairfax County. And that division oversees a number of different branches. They have the conformance review and acceptance, the rezoning and special exception evaluation, and the special permit and variance evaluation branch, which are huge branches across this county. In addition to Ms. Strunk, we also have Leona O'Donnell, the director of the planning division, which oversees environmental and development review, the heritage resource and plan development, the policy and plan development, which is massive. That's the county's comprehensive plan, the public facilities and plan document, which is the guiding instruments associated with the comprehensive plan, and the monitoring of and plan development. So we're very fortunate to have these county members with us today to speak about the growth and development and what it means. But it's important to note that several of these projects that they'll be talking about, many of them take years in the development before they're actually completed. And given the fact that we're dealing with a pandemic, I'm sure that's had a huge impact, much like we've seen with economic downturns when things have been paused. But as soon as things get ramped up, a lot of these get going pretty robustly. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the county staff, and they have a short presentation that they're going to go through that really just kind of informs a lot of what they do. So Ms. O'Donnell or Ms. Strunk?
Hi, this is Leanna O'Donnell. Can everyone hear me? Yep. Get any response? Okay. I think, and I think my understanding was the presentation was going to be pulled up, but let me know. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm Leanna O'Donnell. I'm the director of the planning division in the county's Department of Planning and Development. And Tracy Strunk is also on the call and will be sort of tag teaming this presentation. She's the director of the zoning evaluation division in the Department of Planning and Development. The next slide, I can just briefly review for you how our department is organized. We have 3 divisions and 2 sections. We have a zoning administration division, which handles interpretations and updates to the county's zoning ordinance, as well as our zoning permitting and ordinance administration. We have the planning division. That's where I live. We are the keepers of the county's comprehensive plan, which is a guide for future development. And for today, I will focus on some recent plan amendments and recent planning studies for your information. But we do also, we have planners and branches that focus on environmental planning, heritage resources planning, public facility planning, and the 2232 review process, as well as comprehensive plan quantification and forecasting, in addition to our work with plan amendments and planning studies. The 3rd division is the zoning evaluation division. which focuses on processing those zoning actions, those development proposals, and those land use entitlements, which you may be familiar with as rezonings, special exceptions, special permits. But for today, Tracy will focus mostly on the rezoning applications and some statistics related to those. And then we also have two sections, one focused on our urban centers and one on our commercial revitalization centers. And those two sections, I guess a year or two ago now, we merged with the Office of Community Revitalization, and those two sections became part of our department as well. So our staff provide the review of those comprehensive plan amendments and studies, as well as those development proposals. We provide a professional review. We work with the community, with your staff, and then provide recommendations to both the Planning Commission and the county's Board of Supervisors. And we just wanted to finally highlight that we are not involved directly in the review of site plans, building permits, and development that can occur, what we call by right under existing zoning districts. We go to the next slide, thanks. I wanted to provide just a little bit of background on the comprehensive plan. It's a requirement that municipalities have a comprehensive plan. It's required by the Code of Virginia. The comprehensive plan is a guide that shapes development in the county, and it includes long-term policies and also site-specific recommendations related to land use. So it's a guide that we use and the decision makers use to inform us in our review of those development applications. We have to review our plan at least once every 5 years. That's a requirement in the code. The Planning Commission has to do that review. And I'm going to kind of go over how we amend the plan. But in our county, we're reviewing it more often than that. But there is a requirement that we review it at least once every 5 years. And the review of the plan is guided by a work program that I'll also go over later. The comprehensive plan, again, is it's board adopted guidance, provides a long-range land use vision for the county, and it's used to help inform those decisions about the built environment and also the natural environment. And it reflects the county's goals and vision for land use in the county. It includes both broad goals related to the built and natural environment, as well as general descriptions of land use and intensity. And will also include conditions under which certain developments should occur. It's important to note also that the plan includes recommendations on how land should be developed, but not when that development will occur. That's driven by the market, but is not prescribed in the comprehensive plan. The next slide shows some of our maps. The comprehensive plan divides the county into 4 area plans shown here on the left for purposes of organizing the comprehensive plan recommendations. It also includes a comprehensive land use plan map shown on the right, which assigns a baseline plan recommendation for every property in the county. The comprehensive plan also includes the policy plan, which includes county-wide policies related to a number of elements, including land use, transportation, the environment, public facilities, housing, economic development, and others. So altogether, we have those components for the plan: the policy plan, the area plans, where you can find more specific recommendations for those geographic areas, and then the land use plan map shown here, as well as a transportation plan map and a trails and bicycle plan map. The next slide shows just a comparison of the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. And just to reiterate the point that the plan is a guide and supplies those general policies and land use recommendations. The plan does specify the type of land uses and the intensity or amount of development that's recommended for a particular area. I've included an example here, the last bullet on the left, 5 to 8 dwelling units per acre is an example of a planned density range for residential uses. DU/AC means dwelling units per acre. Another measure of intensity, development intensity, that's used in the comprehensive plan is floor area ratio, which is shown here as FAR. And that's a measurement of intensity when you look at the size of a building related to the size of the property that it's on. The zoning ordinance is a body of regulations that is law and identifies more specific uses and standards for development proposals, such as shown here: setbacks, height, amount of open space that's required for each district. And we've included a couple of examples of zoning districts here. Example R1, C2, PRC, so residential, 1 dwelling unit an acre, different commercial and planned development districts. And it also sets out the process to the development review process to amend zonings and how you would process exceptions to those districts. One of the main mechanisms for implementation of the plan is through the rezoning process. So if a property owner wants to develop their property, they would first check on what zoning district they're assigned to and see what the comprehensive plan recommends. And if there's an opportunity there to rezone to meet the plan recommendations, a rezoning proposal is put forward and is then reviewed against the comprehensive plan recommendations. I'm going to turn it over to Tracy to go over the next couple of slides and talk about the zoning process a little bit and some of that information.
Thanks, Leanna. Again, I'm Tracy Strunk. I'm the director of the Zoning Evaluation Division, and we handle development review in the county that goes through the zoning process. So as Leanna said, everything in the county has a zoning district recommendation already. So you've got, say, R1, which means 1 dwelling unit per acre. So roughly an acre size lot for a house. All the way through all the commercial and in the industrial. And then you'll see a lot of what we call our planned districts or P districts. And I'm doing a little more backup because I understand that there's a large chunk of your board that is new to some of these terms. So feel free to ask me later if we get too jargony. I apologize. I'm not going to go through this whole zoning process specifically, but it is a process. So you've got your existing zoning, your underlying zoning, and as Leanna said, you've got this guide for development for the whole county that sort of says that's the plan. That's where should residential be, where should commercial be, those types of things. What things do we need to look at if we're going to add different uses? And so if you have an opportunity to change the zoning on your property to come in, you go through this process, and it's very detailed. We have a lot of folks in our office that review against the submission requirements. So there's things that we expect people to show us when they submit a rezoning. It goes through a whole process where we coordinate with the transportation folks and the stormwater management folks and Fairfax Water, and we look at all the utilities to see if everything's available to develop, to accommodate the proposed use. And part of that for residential developments, of course, includes checking with the schools to see where the schools' impacts are. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, where they play in. Zoning is going to go through our office. It comes out with a staff recommendation. During that same time period, the applicant, because obviously zoning is an applicant-driven process, would be doing community outreach as well through the supervisor's office to the surrounding neighborhoods. We write a staff report, the staff report and any citizen input and land use committees, that information is all provided to the Planning Commission. They hold a public hearing. Then they make a recommendation and it gets sent up to the Board of Supervisors, who holds another public hearing, considers all of those things as well as the Planning Commission recommendations. And then they vote yes or no on that. And so we look at a lot of things during that process. We look at the comprehensive plan. We look at the regulations in the zoning ordinance. We look at the regulations of the public facilities manual. We look at good planning practice. We look at what's happened in the surrounding area. So there's a whole lot of different things that could play into this process. So if you'll go to the next slide for me, please. Thank you. We wanted to talk a little bit about how our department interfaces with the public schools. So we, as I mentioned, in the zoning process and the comprehensive plan process that's developing the guide, we talk closely with your staff. They, for us, will tell us what schools are served by serving a particular area that we're looking at. They'll give us the capacity and the projected enrollment for those schools. They'll let us know if there's any updates that are being planned to that school that would increase enrollment. And then when we say, okay, well, this developer is proposing a multifamily building with 400 units, they'll give us an estimate of what that would generate in terms of students based on your formulas, and similar things with the comprehensive plan. So what would happen if this is approved to the enrollment in the schools areas? The planning process for your work, the comprehensive plan gives you that sort of long-term guidance. You can look at the plan and say, these are parts of the county where new development for residential is proposed. And you can also input. So if Leanna's group is looking at a plan and your staff says, okay, you're looking to add a whole lot of residential, by the way, we're going to need a new school for that. That's something that they can consider in the language. A few other things that we do some development tracking more and more as we get we're getting a new system in. We're hoping that will become even more robust to sort of track where development is happening. If someone comes through our zoning process and agrees to provide a school site, then obviously that's information that we provide to the school. So and then there are some cash monetary contributions that go back to the work that the school board and the board of supervisors did a number of years ago. So we get commitments for those from developers when they're coming in. So that's a little bit about how we go about. And if you can go to the next slide. Those of you who've been here before will see I always have that top bullet there. Development is market driven. So what that means, and we often get a question of, well, why are you approving developments in these parts of the county? Well, we're approving developments in those parts of the county because that's where people are proposing developments. We can't force someone to come in and redevelop their land, even if we think, hey, this part of the county has more capacity. Why don't we approve developments over there and not in this part where we're really tight? The comprehensive plan does provide a guide, so that kind of can direct development in certain ways. And we do, as we said, review against the comprehensive plan. So, but if the plan says that residential is appropriate, we can't force someone to come in a particular area. Our plan and what we're seeing is definitely developing in our activity centers, which there's a map up there that shows sort of what those are. Tyson's is a big focus of our biggest one, but also our commercial revitalization districts. We're looking to try and target development in areas that have access to transit, that we can, ameliorate some of the impacts on the surrounding network. We're looking for really that pedestrian and bicycle connectivity. We're trying to get, for a lot of reasons, residential and mixed use areas, because then you have a lot better synergy between where people are living and where they're working. Maybe they're not driving as far to get to their cars. They can walk to parks. They can walk to the grocery store, or do short trips. That sort of mix is what we're really looking for. We actually are seeing, these are just kind of some trends that we're seeing. We actually are seeing office, which is good and positive. As you probably know, the Fairfax County tax base is largely residential, and that's a heavy lift on the residential side of our market. And so seeing new office and commercial is good. What we're somewhat seeing is new offices closer to transit and in mixed use areas that may be leaving other office empty, which has some potential for reuse of those other buildings. We're also seeing a lot of desire in this area for housing for the 55 plus market in a lot of different ways and new models of that. But that's something that's clearly something that we're seeing people looking for and developers looking for to provide in this county. So on our next slide, we go a little bit more into what else we're seeing. And this kind of goes to what I was saying about mixed use, and the important thing for the school board remember and for you all to think about, if we're adding residential into areas that used to be not residential, so industrial parks or office parks, you know, you've got there's some real positives. You've got lots of really good transportation networks. You've probably got utilities and things like that. And as you can see, this is just kind of a sketch I pulled out of a case we're looking at. You might have an office building that had some really nice park space that now we can put some townhouses in and take advantage of some of those existing amenities. What we don't necessarily have in those areas is schools. And so that's something that we have to take into account both in the plan and the zone and zoning, and that you guys will need to look at. And we're seeing a lot of sort of that townhouse or stacked, and also some multifamily, but we're seeing a lot of that. Most of what we get through the rezoning process is not single family on a lot, except in smaller areas. So we are seeing in this past year, I would say, a fair number of small subdivisions in older established neighborhoods, which from a zoning perspective can be very difficult because the people who live right around there are certainly have expected the trees that have been there for so long and that pattern. Obviously, one new house in a subdivision isn't going to have that much of an impact on schools, so that's probably less of an impact for you all. All right, our next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about the numbers, and before I get into this, that says entitled through rezoning. So this is looking at the very first stage of the rezoning process when you would rezone. And I think I mentioned earlier, a lot of our districts are what we call planned districts. And the important part about that is there's a few other steps they have to go through even before they get to the building permit. So this would be the first rezoning, and a lot of these units are, you know, 10, maybe even 20 years out. So that's a big number, but it's not like those are all coming online in the very near future at all. And this is our number of units. And as you can see, the vast majority of it is multifamily. And that's again, because really our focus, and you'll see, I see Karen's asking a question. So let me finish this and I'll get to you. A lot of that is in Tyson's and Reston. So Karen, did you have a question?
Yes, I really like this chart, but my question is actually, this is kind of a perspective look, but we have a number of dwelling units that are currently being built along the Richmond Highway corridor that aren't reflected on this, because as I note, there is no reference to Mount Vernon. Or maybe that's the next part you're going to bring.
Yeah, that's probably the next slide.
Yeah, can I, Ms. Corbett Sanders, if we could allow them to finish the presentation, and then I think that might clear up some questions along the way. And if you put your hand up, we'll call on you first.
Great.
Ideally, it'll be answered in the next couple of slides, so happy to do that.
Yeah, so this is unit type. So this is mostly, as you're seeing, multifamily. I will note there that because of how we track things in our system, multifamily does include what we call stacked towns or 2 over 2 units. We consider those multifamily units. So it's a little bit of a skew on this slide. So let's look at and this is similar to last year. Last year, I think when I looked at you, we had 11,800 units. So a few more entitled last fiscal year, and this is fiscal year, so this was through June of 2020. So on our next slide, we look at areas that are by distance to metro. And as you can see, sort of what I just in my calling a half mile and a mile, the vast majority of our development really is metro adjacent in some sense. So 1 mile to a metro station is actually pretty far when you start walking, and that's why there's a lot of places that when you look at them, you're like, oh, wow, I wouldn't have called that necessarily metro adjacent. So that's why I split up the half mile and the mile. Our other activity centers, and we're going to see more of this going forward, are like the Dulles Suburban Center and Maryfield, and some other activity centers. And then that small number of the rest of the county. And in this case, the rest of the county, this past year, we had a couple big projects, like the One University project down towards George Mason, that sort of jumped that number higher than we've seen in the past. So that's just kind of some broad brush area things. And so probably the one you all really like is our next one on our next slide, which starts to get into, this is by district. And as was noted, yes, there's a whole lot going on down necessarily on the Richmond Highway corridor. It just didn't happen in the last fiscal year. So this one changes more and more. And last year when I looked at this, there was almost nothing in Providence and a whole lot in Hunter Mill. This year we just had a whole lot of cases that came through in Tysons in particular, and also probably frankly because the Board of Supervisors was turning over. And everyone knew the Board of Supervisors was turning over. So we had a really big push last year to get some really big cases through before the election. And so that's why you sort of see the big push in Tysons, which shows up in Providence there. Hunter Mill obviously has the Reston corridor. And then that Braddock number again is really kind of the One University and some things happening down there. So it's, I would say this as well. This certainly does not mean that nothing is happening in any of the rest of those areas. We actually have a lot of cases that are in the Sully district that are ongoing right now. So next year, you'll probably see that number up a lot bigger. And it'll just shift over time. And again, these are entitled. So the vast majority of these are not coming online for any number of years. So the very soonest, after they go through our zoning process, they have to go through the site plan process. That's at least another year. If it's multifamily, a big multifamily building, maybe 2 years. And then the building permit and then the actual building. So the very soonest most of these multifamilies would be coming online would be, 3 to 5 years maybe. And a lot of it much further out than that. So that's just sort of a broad brush. And I think that might be the end of my piece, and I'm going to hand it back to Leanna to talk about, and we do this a little bit backwards, but to talk about what's happening on the further out longer range with the comprehensive plan.
Thanks, Tracy. I wanted to highlight for you a couple of studies that are under review and mention also some recently approved plan amendments. Recently, the Board of Supervisors approved comprehensive plan amendments for North Gateway, which is an area in the Mount Vernon district where Richmond Highway sort of meets the Beltway and Fort Hunt Road, looking at a mix of uses there. And also in the Fair Oaks Mall, kind of re-envisioning that mall with changes to retail and introduction of, or a change in the percentage of residential uses there. We call those sort of site-specific plan amendments. And then we also have under review now, and two of these are similar from last year, but are nearing completion, a planning study in the McLean CBC Community Business Center, and also in the West Falls Church Transit Station area. There's been some visioning work in Lorton that's underway. And I also wanted to just provide a brief overview of where we are with the South County site-specific plan amendment process. We could go to the next slide. The McLean CBC study has been underway since 2018, and we just actually had our final task force meeting last night, and we will have some ongoing community engagement next year as this moves towards public hearings. But we've been working with the task force to look at downtown McLean. Over the years, we've had a few site-specific plan amendment requests for residential use. Right now, downtown McLean and the CBC only has a couple of areas that are planned for residential use, and those were primarily the result of individual comprehensive plan amendments that then led to the individual rezoning applications. So there was a desire by the community and staff to look at this area, to take a more comprehensive look at the McLean CBC particularly given that interest in residential use, and also a desire by the community to look at creating a central place there, a central gathering place. So we went through a visioning process with a consultant that developed some recommendations for us, and the task force has been working with those recommendations and developing draft comprehensive plan language that they've been reviewing to increase the residential development potential there and provide those opportunities for a mix of uses. Again, there's very little opportunity there, primarily multifamily we would envision in this area. And also redrafting the plan for this area to be a form-based plan, which basically means that the development proposals will be reviewed under a total development cap and then also reviewed by design and height guidelines, so that we're not assigning particular uses to particular parcels, but rather allowing for more flexibility to respond to market conditions with those development proposals. There is an incentive height area kind of in the middle of the CBC here in this shaded area, where with the provision of a public gathering space, a public park, additional height would be considered during the rezoning process if that public amenity was provided. So this plan, we've been looking at recognizing the importance of maintaining the existing neighborhoods by focusing that redevelopment towards the center and introducing those new opportunities for residential use and adding that flexibility again to be able to respond to the market. We anticipate this would go to the Planning Commission and Board in the first quarter of next year. And I would also maybe highlight this one as a recent example of our collaboration with the school's facilities planning staff, who have been part of our staff core team and also have participated with us in our task force meetings and open houses as needed to talk about schools and to help us with drafting new plan guidance for this area. The next one that I wanted to just briefly highlight is the West Falls Church Transit Station Area Study, and this came out of a nomination from WMATA and Virginia Tech during our previous North County site-specific plan amendment process, looking at redevelopment of the metro station area, which includes residential and office and institutional uses. And again, we've been working with the task force, and they are at a point now where they're also reviewing draft plan guidance to allow for to update those plan recommendations to reflect those new uses and kind of create a center of activity here. The City of Falls Church is immediately adjacent to this site, and they've relocated or are relocating their schools. And have a new economic development project that's approved just immediately adjacent to this. So there's an opportunity here to look at our proposal in the context of that as well, in terms of what's happening adjacent to this site. And finally, I wanted to highlight the visioning effort that's been underway in Lorton. Supervisor Stork on the next slide put together a working group that's been looking at the Lorton area, primarily north and south of Lorton Road and along Richmond Highway, south of Fort Belvoir, and looking at opportunities to create a sense of place in this area, and also capitalizing on some of the existing amenities in this area, including the river, former prison properties, Workhouse Arts Center, and some of those redevelopment opportunities that are going on there. We anticipate that this study will be authorized in January to more formally begin the process of taking this visioning effort that the task force has been working on and to begin to look at comprehensive plan recommendations more formally for that. So that's kind of earlier in the process than the other two. The next slide, I'd like to briefly provide an overview about our site-specific plan amendment process. This is a cycle. We divide the county into a North County and South County cycle, and each cycle takes about 2 years. This is an opportunity for anyone to nominate a land use change to the comprehensive plan for a specific site or a collection of sites. And those proposals are then reviewed by task forces that are put together by the supervisors of those districts to evaluate whether or not those proposed changes should be placed on our comprehensive plan amendment work program. And if they are placed on our work program, then we would begin the more formal review where we look at impact analysis and more formal recommendations if we do recommend a plan change. We completed the North County cycle, and the Planning Commission has just finished their hearings and recommendations on the South County cycle. South County districts are Springfield, Mount Vernon, Mason, Braddock, and Lee. And so we're looking at those recommendations now with our new work program scheduled for adoption at the end of January. And the next slide just provides an overview of where we are with those. We prioritize and we prioritize the work on our comprehensive plan amendments and studies based on our work program. And when we finish an SSPA cycle, we take those nominations that the board recommends that we include and add those to our work program. So in January, the Board of Supervisors will be taking a look at an action item to update our work program that would reflect those nominations that they would like us to consider. Since we, at that point, would have completed a North and South County cycle, we do plan to have a process retrospective next year, and then we would begin the cycle again. And this gets to that requirement that we look at our comprehensive plan at least every 5 years. This is one of the avenues under which the comprehensive plan can be amended, this SSPA cycle. The other is that a board member could authorize a plan amendment or a study at any time. So some of those, like the McLean study that I just mentioned, was an example of one that was authorized by the board outside of this cycle. And the timeline for the next North County cycle, we did have to shift due to COVID and some of the impacts on our meetings from that. So we'd be looking at 2022 once we complete that retrospective. I wanted to just highlight for you what we anticipate for our 2021 Comprehensive Plan Amendment Work Program. I mentioned the McLean and West Falls Church studies. We anticipate those being completed early next year, first quarter. We do have our urban center section with some planning division support looking at comprehensive plan amendment for Reston, although we don't anticipate that that's going to have recommendations that would change development potential. We also kind of some of our other hats, we're looking at review of when this slide was prepared, 2 historic overlay districts. We now have a 3rd. And then we do have some policy plan amendments that are underway, taking a look at our airport noise policy, our public facility section, including schools, and also an update to our housing element. And then on that work program, we would include those South County nominations that the board recommends we take a look at. We plan to resume the Fairfax Center area work. We have a 3rd phase there that we plan to move to our active category. Lorton Visioning that I mentioned, and just so you all are aware, we typically see between 5 and 10 new board authorizations per year for plan amendments that often run concurrently with rezoning applications for properties. So we would anticipate a similar number there. And we are beginning a review of our policy plan. There are some sections in our policy plan that haven't been reviewed in a number of years. And so we've made that a priority to begin that multi-year review, beginning with the public facilities section and the housing section that I mentioned. Finally, I just have a couple more slides I wanted to highlight, and I know many of you are familiar with this work. The Schools Committee Joint Work Program. In 2016, the Board of Supervisors and the school board agreed to create a work program and to develop recommendations about shared priorities between the 2 groups, prioritizing fiscal work, families, and land use. And so we had a group of Planning Commission, school committee members, school board members, and staff from both the county and schools who met over a couple of years to develop those recommendations. And they developed a work program to include land use recommendations and non-land use recommendations, and forwarded their recommendations to our Board of Supervisors in April of this year. And with that, following that, our Board of Supervisors authorized a plan amendment for us to take a look at the public facilities element of the policy plan and take a look at those specific recommendations that came out of that group. And I know there's also, I know there was recently a meeting of our Board of Supervisors and the school board members who are beginning those additional discussions about the CIP and additional collaboration. And I know they have those recommendations as well for consideration. The last slide that I have just covers the topics that were included in those recommendations, which again were the land use, non-land use, and proposed revisions to the policy plan. The work program focused on recommendations for long-range student population forecasting, taking a look at proffers, the CIP and additional opportunities for collaboration on the CIP work, co-location of county facilities and schools, and looking at surplus property, as well as equity and access and economic development in our existing comprehensive plan policy. So again, we're undertaking that work in our public facilities section of the plan, which includes the school section. So that work is underway, and we'll continue to be working with your staff on that as well. I think that's all that I had. I think I'll stop there, and we're glad to take questions.
Thank you so much. I am getting my camera on, and I think the first person who had their hand up looks like they just got kicked out. Hopefully Ms. Corbett-Sanders will be back soon. While we wait for her, I just want to say it's good to see my planning commission folks. I miss you guys. And we'll start with Ms. Laura Jane Cohen.
Thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. I think this is so integral to what we're doing, and definitely what I think the citizens of Fairfax County expect is that we're all working together hand in hand. So it's just always so nice to see a physical representation of that, because we certainly know all the conversations that we're constantly having back and forth. But I think it's nice for folks to be able to see, all of us working together and sort of comprehensively planning how we move forward together and how we work together, especially as we are running out of space for any of us to really develop a lot of new on our own. That a lot of what we will be thinking about together is even some repurposing. How do we use, as you said, the co-location, the idea of joint space, and the idea maybe, hopefully, and with Ms. Omesh, I've been really grateful to get to be on the joint CIP committee. We've only met once, but we have plans for the rest of the year, and we're really looking forward to that. I think the biggest thing for me looking forward is my hope that we will work together to develop a comprehensive audit of facilities on the county side and on the school side, and really get a great idea of what do you guys have? What do we have? Where do we have those opportunities where we have things like, Blake Lane, is that something that then, if we're going to keep it as a park, then how do we maybe transition that to Park Authority and figure out what schools can do? If we have land that's being used by soccer fields, is that something where we have a conversation about how we trade parcels or trade pieces? Also conversations about existing facilities that aren't being used or utilized. When I look at the model, for like Bailey's Crossroads, of reimagining what a school looks like, and all of the opportunities that we might have then to be able to come in and reimagine spaces that were typically thought of something else in terms of county use, and we figure out a new way to use them for schools. So I so appreciate your work, and I really look forward to learning more about how we work together and your advice and counsel on how we reimagine the success as we run out of space in our facilities to house our kiddos and our programs. How do we work together to make sure that we're doing this in a way that makes sense for the entire county? So thank you again for all the work that you all are doing, and I look forward to a lot more collaboration in 2021.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Was there a question in there? Sorry. Okay.
Not really,
You guys-
if they have any responses to it, but no, not any direct questions.
Okay. So, thank you. I have Ms. Karen Corbett Sanders on the phone. I don't think she's been able, have you been able to get back in, Karen?
I got back in, thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, ladies, for being here today and for all of your great work and collaboration with the school board. I have two questions. One is, I maintain a sloppy copy is what I like to call it, of all of the development that's been approved in my area, which also includes the potential yield for students. And as you know, there is quite an extensive growth going on along the Route 1 corridor with a lot of new development, especially now with the North Gateway as well. One of the questions I have is how can we be more deliberate and intentional in making sure that school board members are aware of the planned developments? I know that you have a direct link, as is appropriate, with each of the supervisors, but is there a way that we could have a quarterly or a semi-annual update by magisterial district on here are all of the properties that have been approved or the developments that have been approved in a region, so that we can more effectively plan for capacity in our own regions?
I'll take that one. A couple super exciting things that are going to be happening as we transition from our current electronic system that we use to process every land development thing we do in the county into what we call the PLUS or Fella system, which is coming in the next year. That's going to be a GIS-based system, and the hope is that that will actually all be tied together a lot better, because right now the problem is you have to come talk to me if you want to know about the zoning cases, then you have to go talk to the Department to Land Development Services if you want to know about building permits, and then you have to go talk to someone else if you want to know something else. So hopefully that will all get tied together in the future, and we're definitely looking at the report out and how to, there's certainly ways there should be ways as that system gets underway in the next year or so that we can create some standard reports that get out and get sent out. A couple things that we have now, we can certainly talk, and I'll put on my list to talk with the planning, with your all staff, to see if we can come up with some kind of standard reports that get sent out if you want them once a year or once a quarter or once a month or whatever you want, or if there is a way that we can give you access so that you can just run the report whenever you want to see it. So we can look into that. We do have already set up a listserv that you can sign up for in the county's listserv that will generate weekly a list of the applications that have come in and been filed with the zoning case. So and we started sorting that by supervisory district. So it includes everything from the special permits for keeping of chickens, which, as you might imagine, has been quite big this summer, to a whole rezoning. So you have to look at it and see what's there, but that will at least tell you what new cases are coming in. And we've got some other resources on our website in terms of things that have gone to the Board of Supervisors. But we can certainly talk with your staff about, it shouldn't be that hard to have the system generate basically the list that you're asking for, sorted by supervisory district with links into our system. So I'll put that on my list to talk to some folks about.
Thank you so much. I would greatly appreciate it. A broader.
I have to actually write it on my list so I remember.
Did you have an additional question,
thanks.
Ms. Corbett Sanders?
My other question regarding is tied to that, of just making sure that we have a more holistic approach to it. But my last question is actually tied to getting our students back into school. As you ladies may know, we have a major capacity issue at a number of our schools, which would make it very difficult to get 50% of the students who want to be back in our buildings on a daily basis. And so one of the questions I have is that we know that there is a lot of vacant space throughout the county, both county-owned space as well as office space, malls, and things like that, that we did get changes to the policy several years ago, which does allow for us to use those type of spaces for educational purposes. My question is, have you been working with us, or is there a way for you to work with us to identify some of those spaces that are close to our high schools in particular, that might provide an opportunity to ensure that we can get more kids back into a classroom, not necessarily into their buildings?
So I don't know that anyone has asked us to go out and identify those spaces, and that's probably not something our office would be very good at doing. But what we have done, and what we can certainly talk with your staff about if it's something you're interested in, is the board passed first an emergency ordinance and then a non-emergency version of the ordinance that allows a lot of flexibility in response to COVID. So for example, I was getting a lot of questions if a church or a school had a requirement for busing 50% of their students and they can't put 50% of their students on the bus because of distancing, could they be let out of that condition? And so for anything that has a proffer or a condition, we have some more flexibility with that, and also even some of the by right stuff. So what you're talking about, if I'm looking out the window right now at Fairfax Mall, if Fairfax Mall had a huge indoor space that no one was using and the schools made an arrangement with them to put kids in there as a school, that would normally be something that would probably go through the zoning process, and that might take some time. We have the ability to, on an emergency basis, during the COVID emergency, so that's the tricky part, and sort of how long after that it extends, the board has basically allowed us to go around some of those things, sort of the same way we did for restaurants. And so we have some flexibility. If there's a space that you all identify and you want to look at, we can certainly talk with you and it would be my office and also Leslie Johnson, the zoning administrator's office, depending on what the site is. We could certainly talk with you about what it would take to do that. Now, obviously there's building code and safety things that we can't short circuit and circumvent, which nor would you want to. But we do have, at least on the kind of zoning regulation side of it, a lot more flexibility that we can talk to specifically during the COVID emergency and in response to that.
That's fantastic.
It looks like Mr. Plattenberg wants to jump in.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamora. I just wanted to add that I had reached out and spoken with county folks. I talked with NCS really because of their space and their use of their spaces that they had to see if we could look at that. Because as was mentioned, when from a code perspective by Ms. Strunk, when she says that, you know, there's emergency authorization, the fire code requirements, the air circulation requirements, and some of those spaces is much different than instructional or educational spaces. So that's why she refers to the code requirements and so on. But it's awesome that the county has facilitated a pathway for that, for a broader conversation. But I did reach out to the county. I did speak with Chris Leonard, the director of NCS. And one of the things that we both came up with was the challenge of the social distancing. As you know, when they stood up SRS, et cetera, the number of classrooms that required, and there were a number of conflicts. But we did reach out to them. I just want to go ahead and mention that. Thank you.
So I would encourage the continued communication and conversation if we can utilize any space to get more kids back into school. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett Sanders. Was that your last question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Omesh?
Thanks. Thank you, Ms. O'Donnell and Ms. Strunk. It's a pleasure to interface with you guys today. So I did have a couple of questions about the presentation, looking particularly at slide 13. Do you mind sharing maybe trends that you've seen in this area for maybe the past 10 years or so in terms of developments and where we've seen them? I know you touched on comparison to last year, but maybe a broader view.
And I don't have this. It's something I can look into for you. It's not something I have off the top of my head. I can say broadly, we're definitely seeing multifamily. We're definitely seeing locations. I mean, because this is where we're planning for it, and this is what the comprehensive plan says, metro accessible and in the activity centers. So that's probably the biggest thing. We're not seeing a whole lot of changes in our, and I'm talking about zonings here, not necessarily by right development. That's another piece of the puzzle, which isn't handled by my office. So that's probably the biggest thing I could say is really it is what we've been seeing is multifamily development in the Silver Line corridor over the last 5 to 10 years in particular. And then you kind of see things go up and down in other areas. And the Richmond Highway corridor is something that as we replan that, and we're seeing, we've seen a lot of interest down in that corridor as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's glaring to me, how small the Lee sliver is and Mount Vernon and Mason not being here. So I'm just mindful of, what's going on. I would appreciate whatever. Yeah, go ahead.
I would just add, this shows entitlements, but in terms of planning activity, so we're long range, right? We're looking at the comprehensive plan and changes to the comprehensive plan and through our studies. And then this is showing those entitlements that then come implement those recommendations. I would say, recently we have been working through updates to our CBCs and revitalization areas. So for example, last year we finished our third phase of looking at Lincolnia. And, as you all know, we finished the Richmond Highway Embark study, relatively recently in the planning horizon. And then other areas such as Sully, as Tracy mentioned, has some cases in now, but we've spent some time over the past 2 to 4 years looking at the Dulles Suburban Center recommendations and opportunities for redevelopment in that area, which is primarily focused on office and industrial around the airport, and where residential development may be appropriate and other types of uses may be appropriate. So I could certainly help to provide some information too about locations of the kind of the planning piece. That wouldn't necessarily be shown here in this type of chart that's showing the rezonings, but the planning work is certainly focused in other areas too. And I would say, that we mentioned Westfields in terms of interest in, office parks that may have lots of vacancies or looking to kind of reimagine themselves. We similarly saw that with our Merrifield work recently with Fairview Park, and certainly ideas about buildings being reused for schools if needed came up in the Westfields discussion. And I know, and this may, just to add on to a comment earlier, we work with your staff to develop the plan guidance. And I think we work to set up the plan guidance so it offers a lot of flexibility, so that if there's a need for some type of educational facility, even if it's not a school, but just so that it's set up for flexibility in terms of looking at repurposing of a building or additional fees, or rather than just straight out site acquisition, trying to be flexible given different opportunities in different areas of the county.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that response. Maybe it would be worth delving a little deeper into that actually, because I did mark, slide 8 when we talked about the collaboration with the school system. I'm wondering what specifically the steps are in eliciting feedback, but not just eliciting feedback, but also incorporating that, right? So if there is a capacity issue, because we continue to see these things, so I'm trying to identify those places where we might be doing things differently, especially over the past 5 years or so. I know we have this collaborative team, which Laura Dane and I sit on. I'm hopeful, but still, not putting all my eggs in that basket. So if you could delineate a little more, because when I see, the entitlements and I compare that to where capacity is right now across the county, it doesn't seem that we're solving those challenges, right? So, or haven't been at least for a while.
I just froze.
Did you guys want to?
Well, I think she said she was frozen, but I think she's probably about to start talking about the market, is my guess. So are you able to, Ms. O'Donnell, are you able to?
So, I'll talk a little bit in terms of since that slide was the entitlements, and that's my entitlements. You mentioned Mason. Well, we had an approval in this fiscal year, so it'll show up next year for 3 of the buildings at Skyline, which are going to be repurposed into live work units. So some of that really is, so the piece that's maybe missing is sort of how many units are already out there in that area. And you're right, if the development that's coming in is coming in areas that isn't where you have capacity that's a building that's matching up, if you have capacity in an area, but development's coming in somewhere else, that's kind of a mismatch. Also, if development's coming in over here, that might be an opportunity for a site or something, but that's also not where you have the problem. And so it is tricky. I mean, I don't have a really good answer, but we can, and that's one of the things that I hope with the new Plus system coming online, because then what you'll be able to see is that building permit piece of it as well, much more easily than sort of what I can pull out from our systems right now and the how many units or how many houses are actually in that area. We're very hopeful that it's going to be kind of a nice, robust data source. So.
Yeah. I mean, even in consideration with the types of dwellings, I was, on slide 12 that you guys were sharing. Maybe can you speak a little bit more to that too, and the consideration given, because that does impact our school communities and capacity, right? For example, with affordable housing, we know there's a crisis in the county how we come up with the planning of which of those we're going to build.
And it is, in some sense, market rate. So we can't force someone to come in and do a unit type that we want. What we can do is encourage them by permitting particular densities, which can only be, and sort of guiding the development in that way. Because if you are permitting if you're permitting a certain density, then that might be something that they can only make it work in a multifamily. Obviously, the densities that we're allowing in Tyson's, you aren't going to get that return in the number of units from the developer's perspective with a townhouse development. So they're leaving a lot on the table if they build townhouses. On the other hand, townhouses are pretty profitable. And so they're always doing a balance of, I could get more units if I do a multifamily product, but I sell them for less money or they're worth less. So they're always doing that sort of math on their side. We do have affordable housing and workforce housing recommendations, which are tied to different unit types. So that's something that we certainly look at in each of those areas as well. I'm not sure how well that answers your question, but the short answer is it's kind of the market, what gets built. The longer answer is we know if we are, our different densities that are planned for are obviously targeted at different unit types. So a much lower density is going to be expected to be a single family type detached product. A sort of mid-range might be townhouses or something stacked, or a kind of garden apartment style, or a wood construction. And then the really highest densities are going to be that high-rise concrete construction. So we know a little bit about that, and then we sort of throw it out there and see what we get back.
Yeah, no, before responding to that, I'll ask my final question. I mean, is the One Fairfax team involved in this process at all? Where do they evaluate the decisions?
The team, I mean, there's not a specific team review of that type thing. It's something that is in our department guidance, kind of in terms of what we're looking at, and is something that we pay attention to. Again, since we are responding, in my division in particular, we're responding to proposals. We tend to use that in terms of trying to drive affordable housing and looking at making sure that all of our developments that come in have access to the same kind of amenities. It's certainly something we look at when you're talking about parts of the county that have less access to open space and other amenities and parks, which gets a little broad from the school discussion, but is something that we look at as well, and trying to make sure that we're addressing those sorts of inequities when we can, when we see them. So I would say it's not a specific review so much as it is something that we're trying really hard to kind of breed into all of our processes as we look at things.
I'm sorry, I'm back. I froze and had it. I apologize.
No worries. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to share. My last question was about One Fairfax's, role in all of this, but whether absence of development in certain areas, whether it's the types of dwellings and how we make those decisions, for example, with affordable housing. If you want to comment on any of that before I finish my thoughts here, you're welcome to.
Yeah, and I don't know, I missed Tracy's response, but I know, we have been focused on we have an equity impact plan in our department, and part of the first step of that is kind of a pretty significant education piece that our staff have been taking part in, just in terms of getting familiar and kind of learning about how to have conversations, and one of our next steps will be to look at our policy plan and all of that. We don't have that's one of our next steps, is to kind of take a look at our comprehensive plan, once we've completed kind of this education piece. And, a big part of, I know we have some staff involved in looking at outreach and ways to improve outreach in our planning processes. So I think that is a big part of what we do, is our community meetings and how we do outreach electronically or not, or, translation services and all who's on task forces and all that sort of those pieces towards that part of our work. So I would say that's ongoing, but certainly has been a focus just to first on this education piece for our staff.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the answers and the honesty in where we'd like to go. I think with the urban sprawl especially, I would view that the One Fairfax equity team on the county side and on the school side would be an integral part, right? That they kind of filter everything we're doing. I worry that we're going to see ourselves 10 years from now. Suburban areas, cities don't find themselves gentrified because they just wake up one day and, that's what they did, right? It happens over time when we're not intentional in these ways. And that's just, I want to think of what can we do differently. Again, I know we're on this group to kind of facilitate some of that conversation. We'll see where it goes, but I worry about business as usual. But I appreciate you all coming in today.
Thank you, Abrar. If there are no other responses, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Ms. Pekarsky.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. I see the next hand up is Ms. Tolan. And if you've already spoken and do not have a go back, please put your hands down. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it. I'm in the Drainsville district, representing, that area. So I'm working closely with John Faust and his office on all of these development activities that we've got going on, the McLean CBC, and of course, watching closely the, West Falls Church development too, which is very close to us, and everything else along with Silverline all the way through Herndon. So I appreciate, the presentation and the background information. I'm super excited for you to get that plus system in to follow up on some of Karen Corbett-Sanders' questions and comments. I understand that you guys are kind of in the beginning of the process, but if we can get reporting, over the years, what's coming when, I know our planning staff is working closely with you on that, but that would be very helpful for school board members too, in, working with our constituents and the public, just to kind of give them a heads up on what's happening, especially with the overcrowding issues that we have, particularly in our high schools and a couple of our elementary schools. A question I had, I know John Faust was recently successful in getting at least a site for a school down in, it's called the Silverline location. So it's like Route 28-ish Herndon kind of area, with negotiations on, new development going in there. I didn't know if you had any advice for us as to maybe how we could work even more closely with our supervisors on how we could make more of that type of thing happen to help us with, having resources for schools, whether it's sites or, money, proffers, whatever, for getting what we need.
Yes, that school site was in the innovation TSA area, I believe, and that was that land acquisition was helped in part by the plan language for that area, which acknowledged that there was a need for a school in that area. So from what I recall, that language was particular to that land unit, and was written in so that that then helps in those negotiations. When Tracy's group is looking at a particular development application, and then when our group is involved in that, it's a clear need, right? So we try to, what we do in our planning studies and our plan amendments, as we will identify in the comprehensive plan, if in a general area, I know it's hard to be site specific necessarily, but in a general broad area, if there's a clear need for a school site or building, we will write that in there. So following that, we did that for the Westfield area in the Dulles Suburban Center in the Sully District. It's called Land Unit J in the comprehensive plan. So we've got pretty strong language in there about the need for 1 or 2 school sites. This is an area that's primarily office and industrial, and also language about being flexible with building reuse and looking at other opportunities. But that's another example where we've got pretty specific language about an identified need, informed by the information that your staff provides us, so that as implementation occurs, we can look at that as those development applications come in. And Tracy, I don't know if you want to add anything about that particular site, but that's my recollection about kind of the history about how the plan worked with, how the comprehensive plan worked with that implementation and identifying that need.
Yeah, so I'd say in terms of how do we do more of that in the future, it's the groups that are already underway in terms of the Planning Commission and the school board and the Board of Supervisors groups, and really working closely when especially a larger area is under review for plan development. If somebody's coming in and building 50 houses, asking them to designate a school site isn't going to be something that we can get through the zoning process. That's going to be something we have to buy at that point in time. But for especially significant replanning, because the sort of mantra is ameliorate your impacts. You can't necessarily ask someone to fix all of the problems that have come before. But if a landowner or a developer is coming in and is asking to change the plan and then asking to change the zoning to increase intensity, to add uses, then it does become a time that you can look at and say, well, these are the impacts that you are you're creating, and you know, especially with the plan, you know, the board can say, well, this is what we're planning. If you want that, then we're going to need a school site. So you're going to have to figure out how to fit that into your development. So that's really the best way to impact those, is have a relationship with those folks, make sure they know, make sure your board members know what you're looking for. And keep an eye on those big planning things coming in, because that's when it gets set up. And then when it gets to me, it's just implementation.
Got it. Just an overall question, and it may be too early for you to have insight on this, but with COVID-19, do you have, you know, that's of course the big question, how will that impact, you know, economic development, you know, future growth? Are you seeing any, I mean, some places are seeing increases, you know, are you seeing trends at all yet around COVID-19 impacting Fairfax County?
Well, things certainly haven't slowed down. We thought they might, and they didn't seem to. It seems everything's going great guns. I've heard from the developers and development companies, you know, the single family development, which isn't necessarily what I see that much of, except on that small case, but that's still going forward. I mean, they are having some sort of supply chain issues, but in general, anything that they can get built, they're selling. That's partially probably because of the really, really low mortgage rates as well. So how that, we didn't have that, I don't know what the impact would be, but so far we have not seen, we have not really seen any slowdown. Now it also could be that the types of big multi mixed use projects are sort of so long in the making that people are continuing to go forward with them. And then we'll see what happens. Does it take them longer to build out or not? Maybe, but I keep thinking it's going to slow down, and it keeps not. So.
Interesting. The one other question I had, you were talking about that West Falls Church development, and I was really excited to see the creativity around the co-location and use of, you know, multiple uses for the buildings. And I know that, you know, there was a high school mentioned in there. That's that A Falls Church City High School, George Mason. Part of my question, I'm looking at a development like that, you know, so number one, I'm hoping that we'll be creative in Fairfax County with those sorts of developments as well. But, you know, that is literally, you know, a mile from Marshall High School and, you know, very close to McLean High School. So, you know, those attendance areas for us. How do we look at those kinds of big developments and sort of, you know, what bleeds out of them and what the impacts might be on the neighborhoods? If you are got a whole slew of university jobs, for example, now available there. Those people may not live right there, but they may live in that surrounding area. Do we have a way to look at?
So what we, for our planning studies, we will get the information from your staff about the area, the attendance areas, you know, for the subject, whatever, however big the subject area is. And they will give us information on school capacity and school attendance projections. And so we'll use that to inform our plan recommendations. But typically it's kept to the pyramid. And I may have missed the last part of your question, but we'll receive the information for that particular pyramid and the schools that serve that site, or it might be more than one, depending on how large the area is. So we'll take that into account when reviewing the plan, and then if the zoning application comes in, then we receive similar information from the school staff, which is more, you know, I know that's updated yearly, you know, and so then they'll get to review it also at that point in time, you know, at an implementation phase as well.
All right, I know my time is up, so just warning staff, I'm going to follow up with our staff on that question as well. So I can do that at another time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Thank you. And actually, Ms. Tolan asked several of the questions I had as well, so I appreciate that, and Ms. Corbett Sanders. So I just have a couple follow-ups or thoughts. I know you mentioned that you aren't seeing much change due to COVID in sort of residential housing and townhouse development, but are you seeing, change in terms of, and I know you mentioned office space, it seems like demand is higher, but do you think that's a result from what was already in the works? I'm just curious, seeing what's happening in other cities where there's, vacancies, office space and less office space. Are you anticipating any reduction in office space development and or even corresponding housing development? Another trend I've seen you reading in other cities is people moving, ironically, out of cities and mixed use areas into more suburban. And I didn't know if you're seeing any of that around here and if that would impact sort of what our long-term projections are in our CIP for growth and school capacity.
Yeah, that's what's happening with office is the question we've all been trying to figure out for the last 10 years. To be honest, I think all I can say is really kind of apocryphally that we had some office proposals that were under review in Tyson's that right in February and March sort of put the brakes on, and in September and October said, okay, we're ready to keep moving forward now. So we definitely, if it is within a metro area, are seeing interest in new office. So that's what it's going to look like. How many people are going to be in that office? Is it going to be an office with hoteling, so your staff is only in 1 day a week? That we don't really have any idea about at this point, I think. And it's something we talk about with groups like the Tyson's Partnership and the EDA and things like that. Is there a way we can kind of figure out where that's going? We are sometimes seeing sort of that Class C, Class B, I'm not even sure if we really have any Class C office space, empty out, those spaces that are a little further from Metro. We've seen some of that, which is, how we ended up with the Bailey School a few years ago. And there's a private school in Tyson's that did the same thing that went in. So, we're definitely, it's a whole lot of, we're not really sure, but we're keeping an eye on it, I think, at this point. And I would say, I don't know that, I think we might be sort of the suburban landing zone. I guess that kind of goes to our numbers in terms of residential don't seem to be going down. So I don't know if it's just that it's sort of a good story, but not that big of effect when you talk about a county this big, the number of people doing that, it may just statistically not really have that much effect, even if it shows up on the front cover of the Post every day, or if it's just that we're where people are moving out from the district, or are people moving, because I can move out, but then I can still get the kind of mixed use and access to amenities that I still want with places like Mosaic and Tyson's and the Western Corridor and what's going to be coming down along in Route 1 in that area. So that's a whole lot of, it's really interesting planning stuff going on. So stay tuned.
Yeah, and I would maybe just add that our policy plan has guidance related to repurposing of office buildings and also non-office buildings. So the Bailey's example has been given a couple times, but there's guidance in our comprehensive plan. If an office building were to be considered for redevelopment for residential use, for example, in our activity centers, what criteria would be reviewed. So the plan is set up to be able to react to those proposals without having to go through a site-specific plan amendment. I mean, you still would have to go through an entitlement and kind of those pieces, but in that way, I think we're positioned to be able to provide that flexibility moving forward if it looks like we have more office vacancy, because of COVID or other factors too.
I just bring that up because as we're moving forward as a school board and looking at capacity issues at schools and, even in areas, as an at-large member, I'm always trying to look at the county as a whole and look at hot points for capacity, just wondering how much the impact of office space usage and even long-term, some of the tech companies allowing people to permanently or mostly work from home, are they going to stay in an area that's as expensive as Fairfax County, right? Or move out somewhere cheaper where they can get more land, or just, where cost of living is cheaper, as well as are people going to want the more mixed use or townhome style housing or more of the single family homes? I'm just curious, as we look at capacity concerns longer term for our schools, if we have, a realization of the impacts of those areas, those things, as well as I think people brought up the mixed use or co-locating, right, and repurposing, can we use some of the co-locating to help ease some of the burdens of our schools? So I was just curious what we know. And I figured it's probably too early to really have a good idea of the impact, but I thought I'd ask anyway. And I look forward to the joint works. I think these are some great conversations in the joint work about long-term impacts of not just COVID, but perhaps the changing mindset around virtual work due to COVID, that may be more of a longer term impact. So the only other question I have is, I know, you talked about market drives development, but there's also sort of a planning sort of aspect to it when you talk about, the Lorton visioning and things like that. And how much do you take into account, I guess, school capacity or access? And I mean access in terms of long bus rides and in ease of access to schools or programming when doing some of the visioning work. Is that conversations that happen jointly, or is it really more visioning in terms of what the county needs in terms of populations, access to offices, entertainment, that kind of stuff? I was just curious if it goes into that and how that works hand in hand with that market drives development concept.
I would say we look at things like access. That example about a long bus ride that came up during our Dulles study. When we were looking at opportunities for residential development, and your staff kind of flagged issues like that for us. Like, well, look at where these students would go. They'd have to drive out of this area, get over here and kind of loop around. And so we do. We do coordinate and have the school staff on our teams with those studies. We have for the McLean study, we did do had a consultant do a market assessment for us just to understand demand for residential and other uses. Those timeframes are a bit shorter than the comprehensive planning horizon. So there's a little bit of a balancing that we do there to look at those. I don't know if that helps to answer your question, but we try to do, what we want to do when we're doing our planning studies is pull in all of the issues that we can address in the comprehensive plan so that we're prepared for that implementation, when those proposals do come in.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions. I appreciate your time and your work and helping us sort of coordinate with the county. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kofax. You're up next.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. O'Donnell and Ms. Strunk, for being with us here today. We do appreciate you taking the time. I am going to start where some of my colleagues have left off, just to probe a little deeper. So I guess I understand that the development is market driven. And this is just a statement and I don't expect an answer, but I do feel that there are many in Fairfax County right now are trying to balance quality of life issue with this immense overcrowding we have in some of our schools and the traffic issues. So I understand high density, high development, but that is continually happening. And at this point, there are some of our schools which were at their maximum capacity. And I know you know that, so I just make that statement as I have for quite a while right now. This also is something that other colleagues have touched upon, but I really want to try to find an answer for how we can, as early as possible, find out about what's on the system and what's in the planning process. I understand we now have new systems of, IT systems that will help us do that. But I feel, I was just talking to Mr. Plattenberg with my colleague, Ms. Corbett Sanders yesterday. And, I've been on the board for 9 years, and this has been a consistent problem where she called it her quick and dirty list. I find out oftentimes with neighbors or friends, did you know this development was happening? And this has been a perennial problem. And I know that today might not be the perfect we don't have the time to brainstorm this, but this has to somehow happen. So we've developed the CPDC. I know you ladies are not part of that. And I'm wondering if you shouldn't be, or if we have your wrong colleagues on. I'm not even sure who's on that. Maybe Ms. Cohen can answer that and what they do in your office, because these types of things are just, it causes for frustration that doesn't need to be there, because I think we're all committed to communicating and communicating effectively, but it's still not happening in the best way possible. So I'll leave that there for any ideas you might have.
When we, I appreciate your comment, and maybe there's some more discussions that we could have with your staff. I know when our board authorizes a plan amendment or a planning study, we within the first week or two, have a list of stakeholders that we make aware of those authorizations. But I will say that's at a staff level. So maybe there's, maybe there's coordination that we could do with the land use aides for those board members, or obviously there's probably improvements that could be made to that outside of maybe the staff level. But that's one just initial thought that I had, because we do want to make sure that all of the different departments and stakeholder groups are aware that this, that it was authorized, and then we keep them informed during the process. But I would just throw that out there for maybe an idea, and I can follow up as well, just as maybe there's some improvements made there.
I appreciate that, and I'm going to direct this as a next step to both Mr. Plattenberg and Dr. Brabrand. I believe this is something we've been asking for, and I feel everybody has good intentions, but it still isn't happening, and it's because we're both big bureaucracies and we're all very, very busy. But we need to make this more streamlined. Now it sounds like you have the technological capacity to do that better, swifter. So that would be helpful. But Dr. Brabrand and Mr. Plattenberg, this is something that we really need to address, because we have been falling short for a little while now.
Yes, Tammy, I like what I heard, honestly, about the new technology and a way to even standardize the meeting times, whether it's quarterly or twice a year. The bottom line is this conversation is happening once a year, and it's happening here at the board table. And board members want more opportunities to dive deeper into it with county folks, and get the real-time information. Like you said, you don't want to hear it from a neighbor. You want to know as a board member first. So right. It's definitely something I'll talk with the county executive about as well. We've been collaborating. I think, as they said, the technology is going to make it even easier, but we need to put some standard meetings in so that these conversations can happen. And the thoughtful questions you're asking, the problem solving. Okay, if this is going to happen, now what do we do? What does this mean for schools? Absolutely. And it has been something, as you said, that has been an issue, and I think we can do it. We can do it better moving forward.
All right, thank you, Scott. I would just simply add that as a next step to improve processes, and you'll know what I mean. I don't need to add a lot of details to that. Next I have, and this might be for Jeff Plattenberg. We know that state legislation has negatively impacted our proffer formulas and what we can get from our developers. But Mr. Plattenberg, when was the last time our proffer, like how many kids are yielded per unit per development right now? And when's the last time we changed that formula? Mr. Plattenberg.
Mr. Plattenberg.
Jeff's computer's been having some issues. Jeff, do you need to call in?
Oh, we can hear you now.
I can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I have been having a lot of issues with it, Dr. Brabrand, sorry. But first of all, I'll say this. The communication coordination piece that you had mentioned, Ms. Derenak Koufax, has been something that the purpose of this meeting is an outcropping of that. And yet, it's still, yeah, as you've stated, it still hasn't gotten us to the point. I also think as a part of and I think that was the intention of part of the joint schools and county meeting as well. I think not only do we as a staff level, and that's with the excitement that staffs on both sides have about this newer technology, the automated system, our coordination communication is better than it ever was, but it's still not to where it needs to be, to your point. And I think a legislative approach might also be a good pathway to enhance the collaboration and coordination from the governing body's perspective. So not only there's awareness, I know we brought it up as a part of the subcommittee to the Planning Commission, and I just think a more comprehensive, and it's encouraging with what Dr. Brabrand said, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that that's a logical pathway, especially since we have this joint group working together. I think that's a perfect venue for not only the elected officials, but also for staff to bring that issue up to enhance it. But to your point, your question on proffers, it has been, oh my goodness, it has been over, I think it's 10 years. It's been a while since the initial proffer language was developed. And that proffer language was developed, I call it a legacy system. The school system, I was reminded by members of the previous school board that were former planning commissioners, and I know Ms. Keys-Gamarra is a former planning commissioner, were aware that that proffer agreement was something that the school system was grateful for. The legislation that was, and yet we feel it's woefully short in terms of the actual capacity, and there are regional opportunities. And that's some of what you've heard from the county staff is part of our conversations in the subcommittee address this issue. And the belief is to further that conversation going forward as a joint body. That being said, but the last thing I wanted to mention to you is that, so they're looking at potential for regional aspects because the agreement as the legacy system is, as I said, is woefully short, and it has a divisor that makes the numbers when people do see those. They see the one that we've provided an agreement between the previous school boards and the previous county board of supervisors, and then what we do in terms of our projection set, which is higher than what is usually done through that agreed upon projection yield. But it's been a long time coming, and it does need to be revised, to your point.
Okay, so is that in your, all right, I'll just leave it there. I'll talk to you offline about it, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Thank you. I'll actually pick it up right there because I know we had some discussion about the proffers some years ago. And Jeff, do we have any knowledge, or any of our county folks, do we have any knowledge of how our proffers are handled as opposed to surrounding areas, surrounding counties such as Loudoun and Prince William, et cetera?
This is Tracy Strunk. I don't know that I've ever looked at that to see sort of what kind of contributions other jurisdictions do. Jeff might know. I'm not sure I do.
Well, the reason I asked that question is I distinctly remember when I was on the Planning Commission, we were talking about streamlining the process, making it easier for developers. And one of the complaints was that things were a little more difficult in Fairfax County. At least that's what I recall at the time. But it seems to me how we handle proffers would have to be in relation to how proffers are handled in the area, because there is some concern, at least as I recall, about driving developers to other areas than Fairfax County. So it seems to me, following up on a number of my colleagues' comments, that there are a number of data points that we may want to look at. The proffers is one of them. And also exactly figuring out how to make sure board members are aware as opposed to staff. Those are two different things. board members typically find out from the community that they're upset about something when we reach the point of overcapacity. At that point, I recall distinctly going to meetings and hearing people say, well, if you just stop that development, we won't have this problem. But typically, the Board of Supervisors doesn't have that authority, even under the law, as I understand it. And so if we could identify also some of these commercial revitalization districts for school board members, I think that would also be helpful, because it's my understanding that that is where a lot of the development is occurring, or at least that's where it's anticipated. Is that correct?
We definitely our comprehensive plan is driving development, is looking at the activity centers. It's not just the commercial revitalization districts, it's the activity centers. And I think I had that map in the presentation, and I seem to recall we actually might have sent that to you all last year as well. So yeah, that could be a good resource to look at. I would say, the school, your staff does update the actual formula that we use every year, and in terms of the proffer commitment. So when Jeff said that, we haven't, it's from 10 years or so ago, we're not using a 10-year-old number in terms of school generation. We're using current, they do update that every year, and someone who proffers today to use the formula generally uses the formula that's been escalated in terms of costs and other things over time. So that piece of it is captured, and I think that's all I have.
Okay, so the activity centers, I perhaps didn't nail it down enough, but those activity centers anticipated growth. So I know, for example, there was a project in the Hunter Mill district that created a lot of community angst, right? And whether that impacts how that impacts our schools is often, for the board member, we're sort of the last ones to know. So I'm just wondering if, as part of that, in addition, or maybe part A to Ms. Derenak Koufax's next step, is identifying those particular data points that board members would need to know about. One of them would be those activity centers, and of course, anticipated projects, what those proffers are and how we compare to other areas. And does anybody know this? I know this is kind of off the top of my head. You may not have it, but do we know what our office vacancy rate is? And could we have that by region?
Yes, I could provide. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I could certainly provide it. Yeah.
Well, just to follow up on this, I'm sorry.
Did you mean by which region?
Well, I know you guys have it divided a little bit differently, and we may have to figure out a way to break it up into what we typically look like. We have our own 5 regions. I don't think it's the same as the areas that you're looking at.
Yep.
So that's the main thing, is improving that communication. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. Ms. McLaughlin, you're up next.
Okay, thank you. I'll just pull up my video. I do want to also express my appreciation for county staff coming and spending your time with the school board. I would just like to ask, and not just county staff, but also Ms. Keys-Gamarra, who's a former planning commissioner. My concern after 9 years on the board is simply what does the county have in its ability to truly safeguard the challenges we face with school impact when developments are proposed. I just feel like we are constantly being faced with things that Ms. Derenak Koufax noted, and other board members, where the comprehensive plan allows for the development, or oftentimes now we're seeing a lot of rezoning applications. And when my husband's family moved in the early 1970s, certainly Fairfax County was not what it is today. And the more we start to look like an urban mixed use residential commercial setting, I'm cognizant of what this does to our roadways and what it does to our other county services and most especially our schools. So I was wondering if there is that macro level viewpoint in that I don't see our roadways expanding, and I do see challenges with land available for schools. So could someone just kind of give me a better sense if this is really on the mindset? Because I am worried about the quality of life here in Fairfax County, and I'm just really uncertain as both an elected official and a 25-year resident what's happening and what controls do we still have in place. That's my first question.
Well, the comprehensive plan provides the land use recommendations and guidance for the county for development in the county. So I would say that's kind of the first step when we're evaluating changes to the comprehensive plan. You know, we're evaluating those impacts. We look at schools, we look at transportation, you know, we look at other networks, pedestrian, bicycle networks, to review those impacts and make recommendations on those proposals. You know, if there are issues identified during that process, you know, we will aim to get those potential mitigations into comprehensive plan recommendations, you know, or maybe something doesn't move forward. It's, you know, we often, we try to include those mitigations as part of our recommendations for the plan update. So, so that's the first step. I don't know if that gets to your question about safeguarding, but we do that evaluation as kind of a first step when we're looking at those plan changes and mitigating impacts from new proposed development, so that if a property were to redevelop, there's often a number of conditions that would need to be satisfied for that to be approved when they came through an entitlement process. So that's kind of how it works from a comp planning perspective. And then when a proposal comes in for entitlement, they need to show that those impacts can be mitigated and that they can meet the conditions that have been outlined in the comprehensive plan before we have a staff recommendation of approval, or before that moves forward.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if the board supervisors and therefore direction to the county executive and then to the Department of Planning and Development, I know it used to be DPZ is how I remember you. Mm-hmm. You know, we're at about 1.2 million people roughly in Fairfax County. Mm-hmm. How much more do we anticipate that we can grow and have 95, 495 in our major arteries? Not even when you build near the Silver Line, people are still going to use their cars on the weekends to get to and from the anywhere in the middle corridor. And everybody who passes through here. I just wondered if there's been that sort of macro level assessment of at what point have we built ourselves to a point that we're just choking on our cars and our roadways for daily life. So is there, at that very high level, has anybody talked about at what point they would see we just can't keep building more residential, or is it just build as long as we can create stack things on top of each other?
Somebody want to answer?
That was a question for staff, and certainly if Karen even remembers whether the Planning Commission had any kind of guidance like that.
Well, I mean, as Leanna said, the comprehensive plan is the guide to development. And if the Board of Supervisors decided that the guide that we should be using is stopping, then they could put that in the comprehensive plan. I mean, I don't, mean to sound flip, but it's, I know it's not, it may not be a very satisfying answer. I mean, I will say, that's kind of an interesting question, is how can you change, how can you change over time to accommodate the people? And if people are moving to Northern Virginia, how do we accommodate them, not just in Fairfax County, but globally? And if they're not, if we said, even if we had the ability, which clearly we don't, but even if we did have the ability to say, we're not building another house in Fairfax County, if someone's moving to Northern Virginia, they have to live somewhere. So that's sort of that eternal question, right? So then do they move to Loudoun County and drive through Fairfax County? Do they move in with their cousin in their house that already exists in Fairfax County? Do we build them a new house in Fairfax County? There's a whole lot of different ways we could accommodate sort of people. And what we're trying to do in our process is build systems that can accommodate people while ameliorating the impacts. And so it's, I think clearly the answer is building the same kind of development is not the answer, because if you keep building the same kind of development, that is the development that you have to get in your car to go somewhere to do that. So how do we accommodate the people? We have a lot of the housing stock of kind of the suburban development. Is that enough of that kind? And do we need to accommodate a different kind? There's a lot of big questions in that. We're not going to have a sort of pat answer there, but it's at the end of the day, yes, it's the Board of Supervisors who approves the comprehensive plan and adopts that and makes those decisions.
I appreciate your answers.
Ms. Keys-Gamarra, did you want to offer some comments on this question? I see your hand.
I actually will just make it part of the next step, I think, because I think this conversation is pointing out the need to have another kind of roundtable on this topic. And I think the purpose of that would be to identify those data points that the school board feels is necessary for school board members to know about to move forward. Legal would also need to be at the table. I remember getting a number of briefings as the law changed while I was there. And there are some parameters on what the Board of Supervisors can do based just on state law without exposing themselves to additional litigation. And I think that if school board members had an opportunity to discuss some of those things in the future, in addition to identifying those data points, I think that we would feel as board members more equipped going out to the community and talking about issues related to this. So that's what I would add to that.
Thank you, Ms. Pekarsky. If you can just put me on a go back.
Sure. I don't know if there are any new board members that want to speak. I don't see any. Oh, wait a minute. Yep, I don't see any. So Ms. McLaughlin, go ahead. I think you're the only one who had a go back.
Just quickly to staff again, maybe you can help us understand from the Board of Supervisors where they are on the state advocacy. But as I understand it, proffer laws had changed and it really restricted what jurisdictions could get in terms of proffer funding. And we know that has had significant impact, certainly on county services and most importantly, schools that take 50% of our county tax dollars to operate. And so have you heard any conversation? I know you're in planning and development, but obviously that change has a big impact on the dollars that we can be asking of our developers, and certainly welcome other board members as well who might be following what's happening at the state legislature. But it was my understanding that it was a harmful change in the General Assembly and that there was conversation about going back and getting some revisions to the proffer funding. And if not, then I would say to my colleagues as the next step, I think we really need to work with our Board of Supervisors and state legislative assembly up here in Northern Virginia to get this considered in January.
So are you talking about the proffer legislation that was on residential development that went in a couple years ago. So they did last year, and I think we reported on this last year, they did make some tweaks last year that were very helpful. If you go back to this, if you remember the slide that I had that sort of showed where things were located and where our development is, the vast majority of our development in Fairfax County is actually in, because it's in our activity centers, is in areas that are not impacted by that proffer legislation. So to be honest, the number of units being developed that it even impacted wasn't that many. And with the new legislation that basically says once they sign the proffers, they're deemed reasonable. For the most part, the school contribution proffers are the same as they ever were. So in terms of that particular legislation, it's not, it hasn't had that much effect. Now, what else they might do down there in terms of funding, I can't speak to. And of course, any development that's coming through proffers, there's, local, state, national legislation, law, basically, not necessarily legislation, that you can, if you are requiring something, it has to be tied to the specific impact, which is sort of where that proffer was going. So obviously, if you're offering it, proffers in Virginia, and this might go a little bit to the conversation about what other people are doing. That, to be honest, is one of the reasons that impact fees we have sort of shied away from in the county. We've had a lot of conversations about, is our proffer system better than a straight up impact fee system? And one of the reasoning that one of the good things about the proffer system is you don't have to, a proffer is voluntary, therefore the whole, well, there has to be some sort of nexus, doesn't necessarily apply if it's something that people are offering. If it's something that you are requiring, and that's kind of a tricky line, right? If we turn something down because you didn't do it, then are we de facto requiring it? Well, probably. So there's a lot of, Ms. Kumar is correct. You're definitely going to have some lawyers at the table when you're having those conversations, because there are a whole lot of legal things that you can and can't do. But to answer sort of the basic question of, do we need to go change the proffer legislation that was put in a couple of years? Is it having a negative impact? It's not really. We're in pretty good shape in terms of the school's proffer on that standpoint. But I do have I don't know how long you guys are planning on continuing, but I did have another meeting at 1, so I'll leave that to
whoever. That's fine. I just have a question for Mr. Plattenberg.
So if our county staff have to go, I don't want to hold you up. I want to go ahead and thank you both. I don't know if you both have to leave, or one of you can stay with us. If not, on behalf of the board, I definitely want to thank you both. And there's a lot of interest, as you can tell, for further collaboration and information going forward. So we look forward to our staff working with you all to continue this conversation. And I think
thanks for having us, and I certainly will. I'll talk with your staff about if there's some reports that we can get you plugged in.
Mm-hmm.
Might get some more of that information coming out of the stuff we have now. So thanks.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I also have another meeting, so thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you, ladies. It was great to see you.
Thank you. I think Dr. Brabrand had his hand up, and I think Ms. McLaughlin would like to have Mr. Plattenberg to answer. And
we are
at 1:05. So
thanks. My question for Mr. Plattenberg is, he's been with us for quite some time, and so I appreciate the county assessment of how the proffers are impacting us or not. But I would really like to hear from Mr. Plattenberg, in the time that he's been at the helm here in FCPS, what changes has he seen in the sufficiency of the proffer funding that's coming to us? And would he advocate that we talk with the Board of Supervisors and the state delegation to get some improvements made? Because we know our first priority is making sure that the schools are properly funded, and it's a massive, massive cost to us to build school. So if Jeff could speak to that, and then certainly anything other staff want to share.
Well, thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Yeah, you are spot on. I mean, the bottom line is the proffers are voluntary contributions by developers. The proffer history has always been that they work with the county on, developers work with the county in conformance with those guidelines to address impacts, okay? Those voluntary contributions are elements that we had not been a part of for quite some time. And the part that I was referencing in the conversation was the LOS, the level of service. That formulaic approach was the archaic historical legacy system. And the county staff are correct. And I can't thank both of them enough. They were volunteering their time to come and brief us every year. But to the point, it is something that we have not received enough money on any proffer to build a school in the proffer contribution process financially that we've had. People look at the donation and contribution of land. That does not build a school. So there are some opportunities there, but it's a delicate balance. And in the development and revisioning and redistricting that I've been as a part of the county, it has been that delicate dance of working with the developers and the county agencies, because it's not just schools, it's not just roads, it's not just infrastructure, parks, et cetera. It's all of that. And so the balance is trying to ascertain what makes the math equation work for the development to proceed forward with the county, with the developer, to offset the school impact, and with other funding streams to address and to be funneled into schools to support not only the site acquisition, but also the construction. So it's an excellent point, Ms. McLaughlin. I think it's the essence of a lot of the conversation here, is that the true impacts are never offset totally by a proffer. And I look forward to continuing this conversation as part of the CPDC and the work between the schools and the county. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Plattenberg, because my concern is that the board of supervisors then have to be mindful, if we're not getting it from the developers, they have to be thinking about how on earth are we financing this impact and the need. And so we have to be part of the funding equation one way or the other. So I really appreciate your answer. I'm not sure if there was any other staff who wanted to weigh in.
Megan, I would just want to say to you and really to all board colleagues, this was a great conversation today. And it's a deeper conversation that we do need to continue to have with the county as we think ahead for the future of Fairfax County Public Schools. I had a chance to read just 2 days ago an editorial from the Roanoke Times about Northern Virginia becoming a global center for technology companies. They just shared a recent report, the Global Startup Ecosystem. It's done by Startup Genome, which is a San Francisco-based nonprofit that studies cities in the world for starting and growing new companies. The Washington area didn't make the top 40 until 2017. Last year, it weighed in at number 19, and now it's number 11 in the world, behind only Silicon Valley, New York, London, Beijing, Boston, Tel Aviv/Jerusalem, Los Angeles, Shanghai, Seattle, Stockholm, and then Washington. So we are growing even in the midst of the pandemic, which is where our focus is now. This area, Northern Virginia, is going to continue on a growth trajectory, and we have got to become even more prepared for it in our school system. And we already have strains under the previous the previous trajectory that did not have technology as us becoming a global center for. So we've got to collaborate even more with the county. We are collaborating, but we can do more. We've got to increase the frequency of collaboration. Once a year is not enough. And we are going to have to come out with more out-of-the-box solutions to how we do schools. And the school board has, as previous school boards have already done some out-of-the-box, like with Bailey's Upper, but we're going to have to do more of it, and we're going to have to continue to press the case Yes, the jobs are going to be here, but we've got to have a high quality public education system to support those families. And it's only going to become a bigger issue in the years ahead. So you've nailed it. I think you have, the board has, and I'll work with Jeff and Marty about creating more collaborative structures and more frequency for these conversations, because in a way, as public officials, you're getting it first. You're seeing it first. This isn't on this isn't necessarily on the plate the same way it is for a school board member who has families come in and see these crowded schools and classrooms. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bertrand. I want to do a time check. It's 1:10. We need to take a 30-minute lunch break. So if there are no more questions, I would like to wrap this part up and take our 30 minutes and be back around 1:40. That's okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank